Welcome, everyone. It's Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community. Plus, a live Q&A, if we can get to it, that you can't find anywhere else. It's February 28th, 2024. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator for funded startups that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. We do this by using our over 200 plus Terraform modules that have been downloaded over 100 million times. Real quick, no matter where you find yourself on this journey, we are here to help your startup launch better products faster, free up your bandwidth for innovation so you can nail your value delivery every time. So if you or your team has been banging your head against the wall with underperforming infrastructure, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and you'll get to book a meeting with me directly. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is very informal. Engage as much as you'd like. Ask questions. If you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, this is a great place to ask. For those on the recording, we host these calls live, so join us by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's session valuable, please go ahead and share it with your team. You're going to find these recordings on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/cloudposse to find those. And if you'd like to share a short testimonial, we'd appreciate that too. So you can post those anywhere in the comments of the video or in our Slack team or Zoom chat. Thank you so much. So with that said, let's get into the news. So there's been a bunch of these little, landscape tools that pop up, presumably by a vendor in the landscape somewhere. But this was a pretty comprehensive one. If you've seen the CNCF landscape, you need a microfiche magnifying glass to find anything on it. It's so massive. I mean, what's CNCF mean anymore when every single product is in there? You can differentiate by not being part of it. No, joking. So here we have the AI fun. So this is, I guess, I'm not an expert in this area, so looks good to me. Anyone? Check this out. Yeah, seems like it has room for expansion here.
These are all AI tools, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it's, what it's missing is the filter probably for, yeah, perfect. Okay. It has my vote. So of those, here are the ones that are not strictly like commercial offerings in our open source. So that's cool.
Yeah, the just at a quick glance, the LLM one seems to be section or whatever seems to be missing some notable ones. Like Meta has, if you keep scrolling down, it's one of the ones on the left. Like Meta and a few others, like Google has one now, like, and a bunch of others that have pretty widely recognized LLMs that don't seem to be in there.
Let's see if I remove that filter. What are they?
Yeah, it wasn't in there before either. Right? What I saw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then even what is it? They have the funny name. It's basic. Yeah. Good point though. All right. Other announcement would be this was a rather involved process. God bless the researchers who have the time can go through and figure these things out. It's not exactly something you're just gonna, whip up into a little CLI, but somebody has figured out a way to systematically reverse engineer a given AWS account ID by performing a certain set of operations through IAM policies and things like that. Now, account IDs aren't really secrets. There's no reason to advertise them, but a lot of them are out there in the open. For example, if you use any trusted principals with a third party like Datadog to grant them access, they will share necessarily their account ID that you got to give them access to. So What is interesting though is there are a lot of buckets out there, and you can maybe start to draw correlations between who owns those buckets and account IDs and other bits of information. All right. So another one we started talking about a little bit just before we kicked off office hours today was this one. Codefresh is joining Octopus Deploy. Octopus has been around for quite some time, optimizing the whole continuous delivery experience for developers to make it easy. Codefresh was a partner of Cloud Posse for a long time, probably still technically, though we haven't been doing too much with Codefresh lately. Codefresh, from my perspective, my vantage point, they kind of almost invented doing containers as steps in CI/CD. Now, there are a lot of players at about around the same time, but I think Codefresh really popularized it early, and we were quick to jump on that bandwagon. And then everyone else followed suit: GitLab, GitHub Actions, Circle, and pretty much every mainstream way of doing CI/CD has adopted containers because it just makes perfect sense to run your steps that way. Codefresh, I think, kind of struggled because of that they were no longer differentiated, pivoted into becoming a mainstream maintainer for Argo CD. And they kind of pivoted their product towards becoming the dashboard for Argo CD. And if you use Argo CD at any sort of scale, you probably realize you don't just have one. It's kind of like Jenkins, you don't just have one. So they became the dashboard to aggregate your view of Argo CD everywhere. And I don't believe there's any other product really out there that does that. Anyways, they had raised a lot of money. They take an investment from Microsoft, interestingly enough. Microsoft later came out with GitHub Actions, so clearly they went a different direction, and they had Azure DevOps. So that didn't work out. I'm really curious, like this was probably not a big exit. I'm guessing this was the founders. This is me reading between the lines. No inside scoop here, just pure armchair speculation. But I'm guessing the founders, after 9 years, got bored and thought it was about time to start their next venture. I know a lot of people have, over the years, left. Senior leadership have left Codefresh as well, and they've gone on to found other companies. So that's my 2 cents. So Venkat, I know you had some questions. Did I answer anything?
No, yeah, I think you answered all of them, all the immediate ones that I had. The only thing in terms of like the inside scoop that I came across online, I don't have a working link. It was behind one of those paywall websites, and it was a website that kind of unpaywalled the paywalled content. And now that paywall link is
archive.is, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was like archive.is. It no longer works for whatever reason. But what I had read on there was they had around, I guess, 10 million in revenue. They had like 200 customers, and I think they sold themselves for like 25 million, and they had raised 50 million. So it probably wasn't like the best deal for them, but
No.
they had 200 customers. But yeah, so
yeah, that's a 2.5 multiplier.
Scoop.
So that's a pretty low multiplier. And obviously their investors did not, they got maybe a quarter of their money back or something.
Yeah, I mean, who knows if it was archive.is unpaywalled, a paywalled site that I'd never heard of. So.
Okay, so yeah.
It looked legit, but you never know.
The rumor mill starts here.
No. Exactly. So heard it first. That's all I have.
Matt, were you going to say something? No. All right. All right.
You mentioned it. I was just going to say it was if they raised 50 million and sold for 25 million, no one was happy.
Yeah. No one was happy.
For if you folks haven't checked out Codefresh, I signed up because I figured the product's going to change drastically in the coming weeks. Checked it out. It was I couldn't really tell why I wouldn't want to just run my own Argo CD. It didn't look like it was there was enough incentive for me to actually use your product. So I'm not saying it was a bad product. I just kind of went through the flow and checked it out. And their Argo CD management, you still have to run the thing where you install it. And that seemed like, why not just install Argo CD?
Yeah, so They moved higher up the value chain, and I understand. I mean, look, Cloud Posse struggles sometimes with this as well. As you move higher up the value chain, the value isn't always understood when you're just getting started with something, or you're at the entry levels of something.
Yeah.
So what I mean by this, in terms of moving up the value chain, one of the common patterns for Argo CD is that you deploy Argo CD in cluster, in each cluster that it manages, rather than a centralized Argo CD that connects to each cluster. No right or wrong here. You can optimize for different things, but the benefit of deploying Argo CD in cluster is that it can automatically manage that cluster itself without having to do configuration. So from a GitOps and automation perspective, it's very easy to get it up and running. All right, so now you have a dev cluster, because you isolate dev, staging, and production. They're typically not the same cluster, so that the life cycle of the cluster itself is disjoint. So you have a dev cluster, you have a staging cluster, you have a production cluster. Maybe you have a integration or validation cluster, a load testing cluster, and all of these have Argo CD. All of those are pointing to different deployment repositories, and you need to track now, how do you get a deployment from dev to staging to production? And there's a lot of hacks, if you will. We have our own. Spinnaker back in the day. I say back in the day because I don't know if I've heard anybody bring up Spinnaker in like 2 years. But yeah, Spinnaker. Well, I guess like an Octopus Deploy. I don't know much about Octopus, but I think that's the kind of area they operate in. There's another SaaS. I'm drawing a blank what they're called, pretty popular for this. But the idea is, how do you orchestrate the release process now when it spans different tool chains, it spans different clusters and so forth? And that's what I believe they were building a product for, where you could now visualize the progression of a change from pull request to cluster to cluster to cluster, and that pipeline.
I saw that in screenshots. I didn't go through all the effort of installing their orchestrator into my cluster, like their runtime, whatever it was called. But I imagine I would have gotten there after. So I think it was just too early on in that process. I only spent like 30 minutes playing around with it. And it looked like, my initial impression was I would still need to know a fair amount of Argo CD itself. Yeah. It looked like you still had to write the application manifest. They didn't abstract a lot of that away. So they give you like a GitOps repo, and it looked like in standard, looked reasonable for what it was. But I saw screenshots of what you're describing. That sounded really cool. I didn't experience that. And to your point, I think that's the value.
I think that's the edge of where they were at, kind of, or what they were building towards. So and also of that 10 million, I have no inside knowledge on this, but my guess is a lot of that 10 million is from what Codefresh came from, its origin as a CI and CD platform, vertically integrated. And that legacy product was not really where they were innovating anymore so much as they were trying to innovate on this Argo CD side. And keep in mind, when a company adopts your platform for CI/CD, it is now integral in their entire software engineering process, and those things stick around for a long time.
Yeah. One thing I did notice about just the first layer that I touched is they had a feature where you could write back to GitHub, or like Git, whatever your Git provider was, so you could work on your manifest in the UI, write a commit message, and I noticed Security in recent, like last 6 months, they also came out with the feature as part of their offering, or like it's like a beta thing where you could do write back of Argo CD manifests to basically do UI ops but still have GitOps behind it.
That's I like that. So this came up, I don't know if it was this thing you were talking about, but this write back behavior for Argo CD, which makes it a little bit, well, okay, it's similar but different. Like Flux has this idea where it's bidirectional. It'll synchronize the state of the Kubernetes cluster back to the repository as well. Now, I don't believe that was through UI though. But that triggered something in me. And we have this issue with Datadog. We have this issue with a lot of services. yeah, it goes without saying Cloud Posse has drank the Kool-Aid when it comes to infrastructure as code. Like, we live and breathe this, and we have automated probably more things than almost any other company out there when it comes to Terraform. So automating all of AWS, automating Security Hub, config, GuardDuty, automating Datadog, automating Opsgenie, automating all this. And some of this stuff, while you can automate it, it's just not maybe the best thing to do with Terraform. Case in point, Datadog. So fundamentally, Datadog should definitely be infrastructure as code, but automating with infrastructure as code, something that's a visual element, it's tedious. It's almost like if you were doing the CSS for a website or something, and the only way to see it is you actually also then gotta open the PR, merge it, deploy it, and then view it, and then iterate that way, very slow. So what you do is we use the inspector all the time, right? To tweak things and see what you want, and then you do it. Same thing for Datadog, right? Doing your monitors that way, you want to do it through the UI. So what we've ended up doing for Datadog is now we just export that as JSON and then Terraform the JSON. But I think that some of these SaaS services that sell to a technical audience of developers, infrastructure engineers, people in the know of DevOps and infrastructure as code, I'd like to see a lot more this concept where, yeah, we want to have a record of this in our version control so we can fire off other things when it changes. So we have a persistent snapshot of what the desired state is. We can do it in the UI. We can do it through pull requests, and they're synchronized. And I think that'd be really cool offering if platforms did that more natively.
Yeah, I think the Acuity team, that was one of the other corporate entities behind Argo CD, they announced an open source project sometime in the last 6 months that does that right back for Argo CD specifically.
But only for Argo CD, right? So yeah. I admit I went off on a tangent. I'd like to see this with like mainstream SaaS offerings as well.
Oh, so, yeah, I fully agree on the feature. Yeah, no disagreement there.
Yeah. All right. Next topic. Yeah, this was a fun one. Matt Gowie shared it. So this is a little treasure trove of projects by one man, David Gamba here. It's a mono repo with all of his little projects and things he's hacking on. This was an interesting one, I thought, because, well, it hits close to home. We have implemented, stacks and components at Cloud Posse. Many people have come independently and hinted to Cloud Posse that, have you ever considered using Q, or have you ever considered, using other configuration languages to express it? So Q is another configuration language. I believe it originated from Google, and it's designed to be in pure JavaScript, is my understanding, or JSON, but easily picked up on. Now, here's somebody who's actually gone and implemented it. So he's implemented the concepts of components and stacks. And then if you scroll down here, you can then, describe your dependencies, and you can do all of this in Q, and then, run this in dependency order, presumably, and apply it. So this concept of stacks and components is a popular abstraction layer for Terraform. HashiCorp has come out with this in their cloud offering. Cloud Posse has their version of this through the Atmos tool. TerraGrunt has its concept of stacks, and Terramate and other solutions as well. Matt, are you on the call today?
Me?
No, sorry, Matt Gowie. He was on this one. No.
Yeah. I don't see him on the list now.
Yeah. His And I don't see Hans here who might have some opinions on it too. All right, so that's all I can add. We don't have any of the people who brought this up. All right, well, here's one, Matt, you shared with me. AWS Control Tower introduces APIs to register OUs. Presumably, this is on the tail of the other improvements for managing like landing zones and things through Control Tower.
Yep.
Did you check?
They're expanding it.
PR in progress for Terraform?
I didn't get a chance to check that, no, but this was the kind of momentum we saw when like AWS SSO, which has been renamed to IAM Identity Center, first came out. Everyone kind of said, "Yeah, this is okay, but I'll stick with my IAM roles." And then we saw like all these pretty rapid incremental improvements come out over time to be able to manage it, to be able to do a bunch of things. And now that's the de facto way that Amazon recommends like accessing for humans, accessing your AWS accounts. And I think we're seeing the same thing here where Control Tower is just gaining more and more traction. And this will be the way to provision and bootstrap accounts in an enterprise, in the very near future, or you could even argue maybe it already has started to be that way. But with APIs to be able to do it, now all the other tools that support, any sort of AWS automation like Terraform and Pulumi and whatever out there will start to be able to do this. And this will be the way. Instead of natively creating them, you'll just vend them out of the Control Tower factory.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. Any questions on that before we move on?
Yeah. So just Jonathan looks like he asked in the chat, what's Control Tower's value add to OUs? And I think it's really around like Control Tower will automatically apply policy and lock down the OUs to only do the things that you grant permissions to, be able to do within the, within the organization. So Control Tower's whole thing is not only creating the accounts, but then creating secure policies around them and enforcing enterprise standards that you come up with across the board for accounts and organizational units. So now presumably you'll be able to, so the baseline, so those enable baseline, update enabled baseline, and disable baseline are like, those are where you set what an OU should have. So you can say like, we must have whatever cloud trails enabled, and it must, for this OU, it must send the cloud trails to this particular bucket or whatever it is. And you can enforce that like at an OU level, basically, rather than just at an individual account level. So any account that gets spun up in that OU gets that whole set of baseline policies. That's kind of the TLDR.
And just to be fair, so Control Tower does all this, and it does it for you, like in an opinionated manner, things that you can already do today without it. It's just now it's a mainstream solution by AWS to accomplish that. So like Control Tower will help you manage the SCPs. Like, the buzzwords are landing zones and guardrails, right? So it will help you implement those guardrails. What are those guardrails? Deploy AWS guard. There's no service for that. It is SCPs. It is baseline configurations in the accounts. It is IAM roles and so forth. These baselines. All right. And I believe there are ways to import things into Control Tower in some manner, but I don't know the extent of it right now. All right, next announcement is a minor one, a little tweak. So our core emphasis on Atmos right now is improving usability and improving the documentation around it, making it an easier tool for newcomers to adopt. One of those changes is to introduce aliases. And we're doing this for multiple reasons. On the one hand, you could say this is actually a power user feature. Aliases can make things also more confusing to new users. Aliases, though, have been requested by others. Typing Atmos commands could be pretty long because we've taken this no abbreviation approach. At the same time, we were concerned about making opinionated shortenings of things when it's getting an agreement between what convention or what things to do was unachievable. So now with aliases in the atmos.yaml file, you can just add your own aliases for any of the commands. So like TF, you could alias to Terraform, TP to Terraform plan, and then if Atmos itself is too long to type, well, just use your shell to alias Atmos to A. So now you can type ATP or something. We are using this because we're planning on building other forthcoming functionality that we want to expose with friendlier terms. So a lot of tools out there support generators, things to do scaffolding, things to get a project up and running. We're going to implement that generally in Atmos, but we want to expose it as a very simple command for a newcomer to type. For example, Atmos init. For example, Atmos up or something, which just hides some of that initial complexity up front until you get fully familiar with the tool and you see how it is a Swiss Army knife to do anything. So yeah, that's Atmos aliases. Any questions on that? All right. Similarly, we launched a new landing page for Atmos. So the idea here is, we've been so heads down using Atmos in all of our professional services, all of our engagements, where we deliver, a fully turnkey working reference architecture for a customer. We haven't been as focused on what it feels like if you're using it from scratch, not going through our professional services route. So what we are doing is making it a lot easier if you're coming that way. So on this new landing page, we explain what the simple progression is if you're just starting from scratch, for example, and want to get somewhere. So it starts from creating your project and your scaffolding and what a project would be look like. So you have your components. Those components are broken down by tool chain, and then everything underneath there. So these would be your Terraform root modules. And then you have your configuration. So one of the key things that differentiates Atmos from a lot of other tools out there is that we made this conscious decision, this design choice, that your Terraform should not be confused with your configuration. So, well, some might ask, wait, I thought Terraform was my configuration. This is like the joke is it's Terraform has evolved a lot as a language. It's not just a configuration language anymore. It's more of a full-fledged language with loops and iterators. And personally, I don't like my configuration to be looping and iterating. I want it to be imperative at that level, you could say, even though that's an overloaded term in that context. So our configuration, we moved it out. We put those in YAML configurations. So any language can read or write them, or any human. So that's what a simple demonstration would look like. And then you write your components. So your components are just vanilla Terraform code, nothing magical or special. And you define your stacks. So your stack is just this YAML configuration where we're specifying the variables. But what makes it powerful is you can import that configuration from other configurations. So you can layer it and you can inherit different, you can do multiple inheritance. You can say, hey, take the values from this configuration and merge those together. So Atmos is helping you merge those configurations. And then finally, you're just deploying that using standard Terraform. We created a alias, not an alias, I mean a custom command called deploy, which does the plan and deploy, and plan and apply as two separate phases. But it's essentially like an Atmos Terraform apply. So here's an example of applying those configurations. And if you want to deploy, then staging, you don't have to know a lot of command line foo to do that. And you can just specify the stack you want to deploy, in this case, staging. Whereas in our demo up here, you can use the interactive UI as well to navigate through those stacks that you've configured. The UI is especially beneficial if you're just getting up and started. So that's what we're trying to show through this landing page. Also, yeah, if you have any feedback, anything that you find confusing about what we do with Atmos, what it is, I really want to know. We want to continue to improve this. The next thing we added were cheat sheets. So a cheat sheet, I think, is a really effective device to get at a glance what a tool is about. And depending on what you want to do, there can be different types of cheat sheets. So we've created cheat sheets for stacks. We've created cheat sheets for components. And here's one as an introduction. And this cheat sheet, at a glance, lets you just kind of grok what it's all about, the kinds of things you'll be doing if you use Atmos. Now, this is just an early version of it. I think there's a lot more we can add to this, but you can see kind of the kinds of things that as a developer, you can maybe intuit what these do. All right. So that's those announcements. Anything else before we move on?
I have a quick question around Atmos. I shamefully am probably one of the few users here that have not touched it very much.
That's
and
fair.
Apologies for the amount of times I've been in this meeting. I should really be across. I am curious because the command line that you've shared runs locally.
Mm-hmm.
Does Atmos help with adopting Spacelift or any of those other solutions? Like, like how do you use both? I guess with Atmos, or is it?
Yeah. So yeah, so that's a good question. So at its heart, Atmos is helping you manage that configuration, and that configuration is just in YAML. So what we did was write a Terraform module that essentially reads that YAML and provisions Spacelift for you. So that's why it's a generic solution for doing these things. Like if you were to go implement Spacelift today in your project and you were not using Atmos, the most likely implementation would be that in your Terraform code, like in your root modules, you'd probably drop in a Terraform resource in there that would then help you manage that stack in Spacelift. The problem is now you made that code tethered to Spacelift, or tethered, you know, if you weren't using Spacelift, you're using Terraform Cloud, it'd be the same kind of situation. And I think the vendor, you know, that works in the vendor's favor, but it also, you know, doesn't give you the break glass scenario where if you wanted to run that without that platform, without that provider, you can't do it. So since we've approached Spacelift in a roundabout way that, you know, you should be able to manage infrastructure how on your terms, wherever you want to, whether it's on your workstation, whether it's through GitHub Actions, or whether it's through Spacelift, let's keep that out external to that platform. And let's use that configuration to provision that platform. So in this situation, then you can continue using Atmos. So under the hood, our Spacelift implementation, you know, it's a little bit, I'll be honest, it's a little bit challenging to get up and running the first time if you haven't done it before, because Spacelift hasn't acquiesced to some of our requests to make it an easier integration. But it's still fully possible, because ultimately what Spacelift does is it runs a command on the command line. And if you just give it your own runner image that also has Atmos inside of it, and Atmos has already provisioned Spacelift. Now, when Spacelift calls out to Terraform, we have it configured to call Atmos to run Terraform, I think. So.
Got it. Cool. And then I guess last question on that, are there any GitHub actions that
There are, yeah. So absolutely. So we definitely have all the actions. They're in use today in production at lots and lots of companies. What we just talked about today in terms of scheduling the actual work for it is creating a example repository that you can more or less just clone and get started and use it on your own. So I don't want to commit to timelines, but I hope we can get something like that out there in the next month or so. Also, how you do that will depend on, whether you're using Azure or Amazon or Google Cloud or something else. So this example that we're going to produce is going to be tailored for Amazon, but we will also look towards implementing something that is more agnostic. Let me explain some of the details on that one. So if you go to the Atmos landing page, you go to docs and then integrations, we show how we've integrated it. So we have this integration here for GitHub Actions. We've created 6 or so GitHub Actions. There might be more as well, but standard pattern, 1 action to set up Atmos. We have another action that you can set on a schedule, and it'll automatically pull remote dependencies if a new version is found. We have another one for describing affected stacks. So this is an important concept. So if you open a pull request where you've affected a bunch of configuration and Terraform code, how do you know what you should plan and apply? So this GitHub action returns a matrix of everything that needs to be planned based on the changes in that pull request. So then you use that matrix to call a Terraform plan, and the Terraform plan will generate a plan and store it. This is where it gets messy, because how you want to store that plan file and the associated metadata will depend a little bit about where your infrastructure is running. I wish there was a native way of doing it purely within GitHub and GitHub artifacts, for example. But the problem is plan files can contain secrets, and secrets and artifacts aren't really an ideal thing. I believe there's a way. What you can do is you can actually encrypt those artifacts using the public key of the repo, so that only that repo can then download and decrypt those artifacts. But the other issue is to do Terraform the right way in CICD is you need to keep track of all the other plans that you have in the queue. I'm not talking merge queue, but other plans that have been created. And you could have two components, 2 root modules that need to be planned and applied. Which one wins? Well, the first one needs to win, and the next one, and all other need to be invalidated. So the only way you can keep track of all that data is you need to store that somewhere. So we've implemented that in the solution for planning and invalidating plans for AWS using S3 and Dynamo. And then we're doing the same thing right now for Azure. So you can store in Azure blob storage your plan files and use I don't know what their Dynamo equivalent is, but use that for storing the metadata about what you're planning. So
CosmoDB.
CosmoDB, yeah.
It sounds like this might even be an alternative to Digger or some of the other.
Oh yeah, it is. It's certainly the same category. So you have Terrateam, you have Digger, you have N0, you got Spacelift, you got Terramate is coming out with their own platform. It's a very popular category. Now, we are not in the business of selling those platforms. We're in the business of selling architectures, right? So our incentive is how do we create better and better architectures for customers that work out of the box. So for us, we don't have aspirations right now for building a SaaS platform for any of these things, but we needed a way for customers to succeed with Terraform, with continuous integration, continuous delivery techniques for Terraform. And that's there's Atlantis, of course, that's totally free and open. I believe actually, I forget if it's Digger or Terra Team. One of them as well has open source a large part of their solution as well, which I think is a bold move.
Yeah.
This is our approach.
Yeah, no, this is super cool. Yeah, I wasn't across that. For some reason, I knew you folks were definitely behind Spacelift and
Yeah.
using an orchestrator like that. This sounds like a decent alternative because
Yeah.
we're in a similar boat of we have all this Terraform that we want a customer to use, and they don't have a solution in place. So they're running it locally, and obviously you know how bad that is when you don't have any good tooling around it. You have multiple devs working on it, or multiple.
You're gonna fail, guaranteed. Like
Oh, they've already failed, and we keep fixing it. And now we're like, all right, do we give them a new vendor? Do we onboard them to Spacelift or another option? And we also have a problem ourselves. We're on free tier Terraform Cloud, and we're riding that out till they kick us off. But we know that's happening soon. Plus the outages that happen like every week. So all that being said, I've been trying to figure out a good solution, and this is definitely appealing now for our current use case.
Definitely check it out. You know where to find us, and we can share the workflows with you to get that up and running once you have
I'll
it.
go based off what's in your public repos, but yeah, this is super cool. Yeah, I was literally hacking away on using Terraform GitHub Actions. Have you seen that other project? Someone made.
I mean, there's so many of them.
There's one that's pretty well maintained. They've made like 10 different flavors of Terraform Check, which does drift detection, Terraform Plan, which does plans, and you do it all based off PR triggers. I'm assuming
it's an individual though, right? His name is like DF something.
Yeah, exactly. I was going down that rabbit hole of trying to make.
Yeah. So those are great. No criticisms really of those. One of our customers used that early on as a proof of concept to show that it would work, and they got it working. We've taken that kind of to the enterprise degree, if you will, for Atmos, for Terraform. This concept of the metadata storage and the invalidation of plans, it doesn't support that. It does support a clever workaround. It takes like a checksum of your plan file before you merge, and I think it stores the checksum as an artifact. And then when you merge, it recomputes it and it compares the checksum. And if those checksums are the same, then it continues. But this idea of a invalidation, I think, is a really important one that's hard to do if you don't have the backing storage.
Yeah, that's the thing with like Digger or some of these other options. You need like that orchestration service. And I was trying to get something that just ran in GitHub Actions, but you definitely make the trade-offs on RBAC. I assume RBAC's not, the story for RBAC is not great, I imagine, with this approach, even with your tool, correct? Like
I don't agree necessarily. So, I mean, okay, so how is RBAC achieved? And there's different levels of doing that. So first, every modern solution these days that works with GitHub is using GitHub OIDC together with AWS. So you're trusting then on AWS, the GitHub OIDC provider, which is pinned to a repository, presumably, in this case, infrastructure. You can get more fine-grained with that. It's just how much time and effort you have to do it. You can lock that down by branch as well, and that's a much better way. So you can create provable ways that you can never affect in a pull request what could happen in production without it first hitting the main branch, for example. Then you have controls on what happens before that merges. So the standard things apply. You have GitHub code owners, which will require the approval of certain people. But then you also have this idea of what should you do when you merge to main and actually approve those deployments. And since it is GitHub Actions, again, it's how far are you willing, how much are you willing to invest in doing it? You have GitHub environments and GitHub environment protection rules, which tie into the concept of deployments on GitHub Actions. Mm-hmm. So those protection rules let you actually create anything you want to do as an action to validate that deployment may proceed. So that's how you create those controls. So what I like about this approach is it's conventional, meaning that if you're already using GitHub and GitHub Actions and you know it inside and out, you can make this whatever you want it to be. Versus when you use a SaaS platform, you get 80% of the benefit with 20% of the effort, but to do the last 20% you want to do is 80% more effort. So in this paradigm, you're gonna have to spend a little bit more effort to get it up and running, but you can truly make it work to fit your organization's release engineering process.
Cool. And if I'm looking at using this, should I be looking at should I be taking a mono repo approach? Or is it like with all my Terraform, or like in terms of concurrency, at least, if I want to be able to run 5 different states, like different parts of the stack?
So yeah, I think these things mean different things based on your kind of background or how you approach it. So what you might be saying might mean something different to me than it means to you. If I put it into my own words, we recommend a monorepo for your kind of foundational infrastructure, all the infrastructure there needs to be a root of your tree somewhere. You can't have a tree with 5 different roots. You have one root and then that branches out, and those branches could be metaphorically other repositories, but there's still that central place for your infrastructure. So the question is, how much of it do you want it to reside in that monorepo? It can be everything, which is our default recommendation. But there are use cases or arguments for having more than one repository. And when you do that, it's just a matter of how you think about that configuration. So when I was showing you the Atmos configuration here, this is a very simplistic way of looking at it: dev, staging, and prod. And that makes sense when you have like one app or one service. And then you could do that from a single repository. The real question comes when you start thinking about larger scale infrastructure, and you've seen this because you've been on so many of these calls, but how do you organize things when things get more complicated than that? You have multiple organizational units, you have multiple accounts, you have multiple accounts within your platform, you're operating in multiple regions within the platform. I don't think it makes sense to have a lot of different repositories at that stage. And you get all of these nice benefits with a monorepo for all the reasons that companies like to use monorepos. So you can make one pull request that modifies a lot of different things that can get rolled out as a unit together. And that's where that plan, that describe affected GitHub action comes in. So you can make all those changes in the monorepo, and it'll produce a matrix with everything that was affected. And now you can choose what you want to do with that matrix.
Cool. All of that makes sense. One last question for you. What's the URL for that the new website?
Oh, it's the same one. Yeah, sorry, I should have just shared that. This is just atmos.tools. So.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Thank you. I'm all set. I just need to do some homework and get across it. Thank you.
Yeah, do some homework, drop by the Atmos channel, and if you get stuck, we're there.
Cool. Thank you.
Just a really quick question while you're just talking about repos and stuff. Have you got any good pointers on branching strategies when using repos, in particular for a big monobase repo as well? Because we're trying to do releases through a monobase repo, but it's not that easy. And we're trying to work out different branching models that are going to fit. I'm just wondering, have you got any pointers on where to start looking to see what other people might have done in that space?
Yeah, let me give a nuanced answer. There's the challenge of monorepos in this, what I just described there, like the infrastructure mono repository. And then there's also a different type of monorepo strategy that we also struggle with. And we're taking a different approach with that in our next version. So let me share the two strategies. So there's what we have here in Infra Live. This is like representative of, this is Cloud Posse's live infrastructure, but representative of what our customers would have. So you have your components in here. Everything right now here, we're practicing trunk-based deployments. So there is no branching. It's a GitHub flow, essentially. There's no Git flow like develop branch or anything like that. Then you have the monorepo strategy that we have with our components, which is where we distribute all of these different root modules that we have. We spent many sessions at Cloud Posse talking about how we could try and fix this with different branching techniques for these components, and just realized that we were fitting a square peg in a round hole. So my point here is, depending on what you want to do, maybe the monorepo is actually not the right strategy if you're going to need advanced branching strategies. Let me explain. So what we have here in Terraform AWS components is a root module ecosystem of all of these components, and each one can vary independently. So they are consumed independently by customers and all of these are unfortunately versioned at the version of the monorepo. So in GitHub, when you have those versions really don't make sense anymore when there's no logical relationship necessarily between when that version is bumped. Like, we can introduce a breaking change in the VPC, so should we do a major version of our release here? And that wouldn't make sense. Matt, you want to clarify?
Yeah, I just want to point out one very important fact here is that I think it depends on what's in your monorepo. So the reason, like all the reasons behind what Eric just said, is because we're using Terraform in this monorepo, and Terraform does not actually have like a good like versioning strategy other than using like Git versions to be able to version your artifacts, which are the repo itself. But if you're using something like JavaScript or TypeScript code or Golang or Perl or any other, I didn't mean to say Perl, I meant to say Python. I don't know why Perl came out. That was like that came out way deep in the back of my head from somewhere. Or Python or whatever. There are tools for helping you build artifacts and and version those artifacts independently. So like when you publish to the npm repository, you can create a version that you're publishing, even if you like are publishing out of a single monorepo. So I think it depends on what you're building in the monorepo, what tools you're using, and a bunch of other things. And then even one layer above that, pretty much no matter what you're using, if you're willing to absorb the the learning curve, there's always Bazel, which from Google, which will essentially let you like publish and version almost anything independently of one another from a monorepo. So I think there's a ton of variables to flip here to determine does it make sense or not. I think it all depends on what you're publishing.
I think the scenario that was just described before is pretty similar to the issues that we've got, is when do you actually create a release? And for us, we've essentially got one monorepo. We've got a variety of clusters that we're doing work and taking it through. In other words, like we've got a lab repository, a lab cluster, and obviously people want to actually do work in that lab area. Then eventually we want to turn that into a release and actually take it all the way up through change control. So it's really about how we manage taking that change all the way from the beginning all the way through into something ultimately that we're going to release, and the branching structure that we need to put in place to actually support that. So yeah, we're starting to move away from that old Git flow type approach, having dedicated branches for doing types of things. So that was really the guts of the question, is what sort of flow you
Yeah.
guys actually use from the branching perspective to take a piece of work all the way through? Because ultimately you're going to be creating a release and giving it to a customer, and that's fairly similar to what we're doing as well. We've got a repository, we do work in it, and eventually a customer's going to pick it up and actually use it.
And you're talking Terraform and infrastructure?
Oh yes, most definitely.
Yeah, just confirming. So what we have settled on as primarily our recommendation for this, because we primarily practice trunk-based GitHub flow style development. So we have decided to not lean on branching too much, and instead lean on some slight duplication. I don't have a precise example here to show you, but the idea is, so these components you see like Terraform VPC, we're just saying that we want all environments to converge on exactly this root module, this component. In the event that you cannot take that approach where everything always is trying to converge against the same version that is in main, then you create versioned directories, more like major version directories. So like V1 and V2 or V3. Now, we are saying you actually copy those files. So we're not using Git to optimize that process in any way. And what we're saying when we do that is that we are deliberately diverging. We're saying that if we're pinning dev to V2 of the VPC, it is now explicitly diverged from production and staging, which are pinned to V1. And I like this because we're being very explicit that these two could never converge because they're pointed to two different exact locations on the file system. And then when we are ready, we can start now updating configurations in staging and production to point to the V2 VPC. And through GitOps and through the GitHub action workflows or Spacelift or whatever you're using, when you make that change, you will exactly see, and across all environments, the impact of that change before merging it. One of the most common practices in the Terraform community, and this is not a criticism of it, there are pros and cons with both approaches, we've just taken a different way, is that in a lot of Terraform implementations, you pin dev, staging, and production each to their own specific semver version. And when you want to make a change in dev, you open a PR, you change that pinning. When you merge that. When you want to make that change in staging, you open a PR, you merge that. And when you want to make a change in production, you open that PR, you merge that. Now, this is using pull requests as the mechanism of promoting a change across all environments in a deterministic sequential order. It puts the onus on the developer to do it or your internal processes for it. There is not that much tooling to help make that better. You can use Dependabot technically and RenovateBot, I guess, to automatically open PRs when that new version is available, just recognizing these approaches. I'll contrast that with what we do. So in our situation, you open that pull request, you make the changes, and in that pull request, you see the impact in every environment that uses it. I like that because now there's no surprise after you've already merged into main, what's going to happen in staging, what's going to happen in production. And we use the release process to push that through to those environments. And that release process is orchestrated through the GitHub Actions. So we have accounting for every change that needs to happen in every environment. No change is left behind. So yeah, so do you
just described our problem.
Yeah, because one of the problems I like about this is when you make all these changes in dev and you're pinning in dev and you're only doing it there, you're doing that with blinders on, with no insight into what that impact is going to be in staging until you decide to pin staging to that new version. So it encourages or fosters aggressive changes in Terraform, which could be catastrophic when you actually try and go and do it, or at least disruptive.
I think that's a perfect analogy of what the experiences that we're seeing. Because we're pretty much doing, well, we started to try and do what you just later described. However, we've also diverged into that other pattern you initially described as well, where a person is actually making changes into those respective branches with separate PRs. So you can imagine straight away you've got issues with, have they got the right stuff in that PR? Can we even test it in that state that it is at the moment? The answer is no. So I definitely think getting back to that single change and actually pulling it through is definitely a much better approach.
Yeah. I don't think the approaches are mutually exclusive. It does push some of the onus back on the developer. I think that by and large, like in larger infrastructures that you can easily have 100 or more, 200 of these root modules. And it becomes a tremendous onus when each one is allowed to be pinned and versioned, long-lived in every environment. You get environments that fall very far behind. And yet you also want to be able to innovate and maybe make some aggressive experimentations and changes. I think that these two are not mutually exclusive. I think the default should be optimized for, let's try and keep everything by default always converging on the latest version that is in main, that's supposed to be stable. And then when we need to do experimentation, when we need to do some more radical changes to a given component, let's explicitly diverge it in the code tree, creating a separate folder, a separate version for it. And then the environments that are suitable for using that, we start testing it. And then when we have that finally validated, those are merging into main, but only things pointing to it are using it. So it's a stable approach that way as well. And
Thank
I know
you. It was great help.
And yeah, well, the great questions, Michael, or Matthew rather. Thanks for posting those. And yeah, if you have any more follow-ups next week, please join and we'll help answer those.
Thank you so much.
With that said, we are at time. I'm gonna jump over here and do my outro. Thanks, everyone. If you enjoyed the session today and you want to share it with your team, we'll post a recording of this in a few hours to our YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse. To register for our live weekly sessions, just go to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. And you'll get an invite directly into your inbox with a calendar event so you can attend. We also have a podcast where we syndicate these. They are at podcast.cloudposse.com, so you can listen to them in the car or however you consume your podcasts. And finally, if you want to work with Cloud Posse or you're curious if Cloud Posse can move the needle for you, go to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and we'll see if we can move the needle at your organization. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.